One of the cool things, server has not really had a lot of development from Microsoft in several years. And so you'll notice that a lot of the tools that are in the server course still look very similar because they really haven't changed. But one of the cool things we do in our server courses, which I don't know how many of you are familiar with our server courses, but our infrastructure in the server courses is based on a host server that has a bunch of guest servers on it. So the corp server that we're looking at here is actually a Hyper-V host. And if you click on corp server, you'll see that the servers in the environment that present the infrastructure to the environment, they are actually running as virtual machines on this Hyper-V host. So that's something that's really cool about this course is we try to emulate what people are doing in the real world as far as being able to set up their server environments. We've actually been doing this since the Server 2016 courses, so we've been doing this for a while, but it's a great option. If you'll notice, each one of the servers has a name that kind of represents what it is. The Corp DC server is a domain controller. We have a web server, we have a file server, a DHCP server, and a WSUS server. Um, each of those, each one of those servers, if you double click on that and you open up the server, the tools that you'll find in this server are specific to that server. It's not just a generic interface. So if you look at tools here, you'll find that you've got your Active Directory Admin Center, sites and services, and users and computers. You've also got, because this is your DNS server, it's a domain controller and a DNS server. Then you have the ability to work on DNS from here, and also group policy management is available on the domain controller. So you've got all of the tools that you would typically have on a domain controller. And if you open Active Directory sites and services, or excuse me, users and computers here, you'll see that we have our domain. Our internal domain is corpnet.local, and if you've played with our cybersecurity courses, our new external domain is corpnet.xyz. And in you'll see that it has the typical structure of the corpnet company, and all of the research, dev, and sales, and servers, and support, and workstations. And you'll probably find that this looks amazingly like a little company like TestOut. All of the same kind of departments that we have. It was very cool. It's easy to structure our courses around something that's realistic, and a small company like TestOut is perfect for that. So very similar kind of organization to what our actual company looks like, which is kind of cool. So that's the domain controller. If you notice on the domain controller, we have all of those domain controller type of tools from the on-premise kind of servers. If we look at the file server, it doesn't have any of those tools. It does have File Server Resource Manager and some of those things like that, but we don't have all of the tools that you would typically have on the domain controller on the file server. So each server is role-based and does its job. For example, we have the DHCP server in the environment here, and when we look at the DHCP server, and you open up DHCP, and if you look at the configuration of this server for our corpnet.local internal domain, um, and look at IPv4 and look at the scope. The cool thing is this is actually the DHCP server for the simulations, and the way that it gets configured here is what happens in the simulation. It's really awesome that, so this is the address pool from 1 to 29. We've got that excluded for our servers. And so the servers are all, in that range from 1 to 29. If you look at the address leases that are going on right now, all of the typical computers that you see in our environment have got a DHCP address that they got from this DHCP server. So DHCP in the labs is configurable from a role-based DHCP server that actually hands out addresses to the machines that are on the network. And what's fun is we, in some of our other courses like Ethical Hacker and Cyber Defense, we do some DHCP spoofing types of simulations, and those DHCP spoofing simulations are done with, this is a real DHCP server on the simulated network. It's kind of cool. The guy who designed our simulated network actually was very familiar with the way Microsoft did networking, and so it's been fun to see, the network a lot of times functions the same way as a real network would. If you get a duplicate IP address, we see the same kind of errors. If you have a computer that's disconnected, we see the same kind of errors. And so the troubleshooting on the network and the things that you can do in this environment are just like what you would do on a real network, even though it's simulated. And we have, if you notice the many servers that we have here, um, each one of these servers would be several $1,000s in the real world if you were trying to simulate that. So it's a great thing to be able to simulate that. So that's kind of our Server Pro course. We simulate the servers and the on-premise piece, that part of it. All right, so this is the on-premise side of our Server Pro course, the Hybrid Server Pro, and as I mentioned, about 75 to 80% of the AZ800 course is still dealing with on-premise and the on-premise servers and how to manage those, how to manage DNS and DHCP and all of those things, all of the server management, even into as far as domains and trusts and all of that in the course that we'll be talking about in this one. So. One thing that I would also like to point out on this cool page right here is, if you notice, we also have the check answers button. So this particular lab is already initiated with the check answers feature enabled. And so when I click on check answers, I get just the specifics of what I was supposed to do. Obviously, I didn't do anything that I was supposed to do for this particular lab, but I did show you several things in the lab. But once again, you could hit the keep working and move back and finish the lab. Or I guess I should have showed you what happens when you hit score lab. It comes up and then you get the explanation and the information that you would typically get. So that's what it looks like when you finally hit score lab. Okay, so next, this is one of our newest simulations that we're working on for the Hybrid Server Pro course. If you'll notice, Azure. We are simulating Azure and some of the pieces of Azure that we would be able to, that would help you, the student, understand how to, like I said, the AZ800 course is kind of along the lines of you have an on-premise set of equipment, and how are you going to begin to synchronize that with the cloud? And so we have enough of the Microsoft Azure simulated that we'll be able to at least work on file synchronization and synchronizing Active Directory and some of those key concepts that are important for working with that. But I would like to show you at least, as far as resource groups and creating things, we can click on resource groups. We can create a resource group. We'll call this one, just call it TestOut. How about? And we'll review that, validation passed. And I'm going to go ahead and create this group, and you can go to that resource or pin it to the dashboard. So just like you would see this in Azure, when you create something new, you get the little pop-ups that come up here. If you look at this resource group that we just created, we can come to the resource group page, and you can see that so far we don't have anything in the resource group. We'll go ahead and click on create here to create, let's create a virtual machine. And took us to the other page. Let's create an Azure virtual machine. Let's call it Corp Cloud. And we're going to make it, you can do an Ubuntu, or we are, in this case, we're going to create a Azure Data Center 2022. You can tell it, what size of memory this is supposed to have. Let's make this one a little bigger and give it, this one will be $121. Nice that it tells you how much it's going to cost. I set up some Azure Active Directory domain services, and Andrew will tell you that it started billing us $300 a month. So it's very expensive sometimes. But there's also cheaper options. Instead of $121 a month, there's the cheaper options with less expensive options. So Azure does some cool things. Let's see, we'll give it a name. We'll give it the unfortunately very boring name. So how do we want to access this machine with port 3389 and all of that? We are able to do a little bit of configuration of the disks and the networking. We'll go ahead and go to review and create here. And I believe that's as far as the simulation is functioning at this point. But the next step would be we create a virtual machine and it shows up in its page, and we would be able to remote into that virtual machine just like we do with the Hyper-V machines. We can remote into those and work on the different machines that are in the cloud. So very cool. This is still a work in process that we'll have a little bit of a preview of what we're playing with and what we're working on for um, this course. We're planning on having the student being able to set up file synchronization between their on-premise servers and the cloud. We're also working on having them be able to synchronize the Active Directory users between the on-premise servers and the cloud, and some other on-premise, or as far as the virtual machines are concerned, being able to add disks and some of those kind of features is what we're looking at being able to do in the cloud, and have the student be able to actually, once they've created that server in the cloud, be able to access that server, manage that server, just like we do with the servers that are here. So very cool.